all enrolled into the 4 SCCM subject, and as this name suggests, it's a System Center Configuration Manager. Okay, so we're going to get started with System Center Configuration Manager today, and we're going to talk about just get started with it. But before we go ahead, just what I want to discuss is how obviously we're working online now, how we can access files. So if you guys weren't aware, there's files that's normally on our L drive in the IT Studies NAS, but you can actually access those via the internet connection now. So if you can see where I'm at, can you all see my screen?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, no worries. So basically, if it under the IT Studies Home Learn page, has everyone got access to that? Guys, you got access to
Just checking, but it should do.
Yeah. All right. So basically, there's this area called IT Studies NAS External Access, and basically it's a web interface with this URL. So you might want to put that in your favorites or something like that. And if you click on it, it will take you to a login page. Okay, you log in with your. If you can look at the format there, it's the domain is TAFE.SA. / the username is obviously your normal username. For me, it's that, and the password is your normal password for logging in to learn and everything else through TAFE. So once you log in, it's a web interface, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's the quickest way of accessing the files or anything, but as we all know, we're home now, and obviously we still have these large files that you need access to. Okay, for example, you for today's worksheet, for example, you'll need to access some virtual machines, and these virtual machines, like you normally see on your IT Studies NAS, is broken up into various areas. And for us, the operating system is Microsoft. It's under Microsoft. It's virtual machines, and then you'll see that these are all the virtual machines that are associated with Microsoft operating system. Okay, let me just quickly expand the subject files. So yep, sorry, I'll place it here instead because it's a whole heap of files that we need. So there's this 4 SCCM VMs. And if you notice, if you're familiar with doing courses with me with the Server 2016, you'll be familiar with the idea of the Golden Master. Oops, I shouldn't have clicked on that, but so the idea of the Golden Master, then you have the domain controller, your SCCM, and you have a Windows 10 virtual machine. And the Windows 10 virtual machines sometimes required, sometimes not required. But this is just to do with today's worksheet. But you'll see that you'll need other things that you'll need during the term. For example, today, if we look at what the worksheet is, so you'll be familiar with the format of lecture, then worksheet, hopefully. And with the worksheet, it always specifies where the virtual machines are. Okay, so I was actually in the wrong place when I was showing you. So if we go back to here, go back to the Microsoft area, VMs, DXE SCCM, that's what we need today, okay, which has a couple of virtual machines in there. So that's going to take a while, guys. That's going to take a while to download. So so basically what we'll do today is we'll go through the topic, and then we'll get you to download the virtual machines and to work on it at another time, because I know how long it may take you guys to download onto your computer through the internet connection. And obviously we have 2 classes a week, so today and also on Wednesday, I think. And that's what we're going to do. So with these with the SCCM virtual machines, it's pretty resource intensive, guys. So have you guys, what kind of physical machines do you have at home?
I'm running on a laptop right now.
Yeah, and how much CPU or memory and stuff do you have?
It's got 8 GB, unfortunately, but I am getting a new desktop soon, so hopefully within a
Soon,
week
okay.
or two.
Yeah, and how much RAM would that new desktop be? Will have,
16 gig.
and what kind of CPU does it have?
It will have an i5 Gen 9.
Okay. No, that's good. Yeah, definitely good. Obviously, with the other big thing is the solid state hard drive. You've got a solid state hard drive in your new desktop coming?
Yeah, it will have 500 GB, so.
Okay, no worries. So that's good. What about the rest of you guys?
Yeah, I got 16 gigs with a
Yeah,
Ryzen 5 2600,
yeah,
which
and
hopefully should be alright.
yeah, I think it should be okay. It's just that normally. And what about you, Walter? What kind of?
I've also got 16 gig.
You got 16 gig,
Yeah.
and what kind of CPU do you have?
I'll have to upgrade most likely. I've got an older laptop here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys are probably asking, why are you asking about CPUs today? Normally we don't even worry about the CPU because there's not much that happens on the virtual machines. But unfortunately, so this is a relatively new course. So we only started delivering it end of last year. But what we discovered was this this is actually quite some parts of the worksheets are quite intensive, especially during the initial setup and configuration of these services. So
Okay.
normally, sorry,
Okay.
who was that?
That was Reese, yep.
Yeah. So especially during the initial setup and configuration, you know how when we create a virtual machine, we just create one with just a single CPU core and whatnot. With these ones, I noticed that when we created with single CPU core, it was taking quite a bit longer than if we gave it a dual core at least. So and yeah, it's you'll notice it's actually some of the worksheets will take a very long time. You don't even know things are happening except for the fact that there's so much CPU activity, because once you configure something, it's not necessarily instantaneous that it's done. It's actually happening in the background. That's what we've discovered. So that's why CPU, I'm asking about CPU quite a bit, because I would like for us to give the SCCM virtual machine in the future at least 2 cores, if not more. You know, obviously, if you've got multiple cores, so for example, if I look at my virtual machine, my physical machine, should I say, and I open the resource manager and we look at the CPU, you can see on mine I've got 8 cores. Okay, so what that means is I can safely give my virtual machines up to 4 cores without overwhelming my system. Okay, and you may notice, you might be asking, why do we need to give so many cores to the virtual machine? Why is there an issue with giving them 1 core, 4 cores, whatever? Why can't we give them 8 cores? Let's just have a quick discussion about that, because basically a lot of in the past we could just give virtual machines 1 core because we don't do much with them. As you know, we've been configuring Active Directory, and that's not CPU intensive at all, and various other services. And our virtual machines are basically just there, not doing much. But a lot of programs now are designed to use more than 1 core. Okay, are designed to use more than 1 core at a time. So therefore, it's actually more efficient to have more than 1 core on your system. But then you might ask, why don't we just give them? Let's say my computer has 8 physical cores. You can see that on here shows the CPU number 7, and CPU 0, obviously meaning there's 8 cores. Um, the reason why we can't give it 8 cores, even though it would be great to give it to 8 cores, is because it's a virtual machine, and basically in order for a virtual machine's virtual CPU to have a cycle, and if you've given it 8 cores for the virtual machine, it will have to wait for all 8 cores of your physical machine to be available at exactly the same time in order for it to have a sort of a turn on this CPU. You get what I'm saying? It's a lot harder to get to get a turn when you're looking for 8 cores free at the exact same time than it is if you were looking for 1 core free. It's a bit like going to a restaurant back in the day where we could get a table for 1 or 2, a lot easier than say if we can get a table for 10. You get me, guys?
Yep.
Yep.
So basically, probably the number of cores was never an issue for our virtual machines in other subjects, but I'm just saying that in this one, it does pose an issue. And obviously, how many cores you give it would depend on your specific machines. Okay, so if you've got 8 cores like mine, you can give it maybe at least 2, up to 4. If you've got only 4 cores, you probably can maximum only give it 2 cores. And if you go, and obviously that's sort of on the boundary of whether it's good or not. So getting into the subject, so with the assessments, there is 2 assessments to be done. They're both project based, and as usual, some of it is going to be written and some of it is going to be practical. Okay, so right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this for now because I'm going to we're going to update it and change it a little bit from the last time we delivered it. So I won't make it available to you just yet, but I'll make it available to you guys by the week 3. And obviously by week 3, we should have a sort of a good understanding of what we're doing anyway, and then be able to complete those assessments, and I'll walk you through it. So getting back to our topic for today, let's see where we. So today is a bit of an overview of what SCCM is. Has anyone heard of the term SCCM before?
Not before, no.
No.
No. Okay. So yeah. So I'd like normally what I'll do is, if we're in a classroom, is I would point you to the fact that we have. Oops. We have this software center. Remember seeing that on your desktop computer in TAFE, guys?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yep.
So basically, through this software center, and bear in mind I'm at home and I'm not connected to the TAFE network, but basically through this software center, we are able to deploy apps. You can see that there's a whole heap of apps. There's even more. It's just that these are the ones that I personally have access to. Not to say that if I was working in another department, I might have different apps. You'll see that there's updates, there's operating systems, and there's compliance. Okay, you can see that these are all installed. So what is SCCM? SCCM actually is a configuration manager. It's System Center Configuration Manager, but with Microsoft, the Configuration Manager really means it's a management system that controls many other parts of many other services. So, for example, you guys, through doing the various Microsoft Server courses, have done WSUS, for example, have done DHCP, you probably looked at deployment. You probably heard me talk about deployment services. If you've never heard of it, it's the Windows Deployment Services. But you might have heard of all those things. You might have installed software through group policies as a way of automating installation of of programs. Like I think Walter and Reese, we just finished the 4 IMWS subject where we deployed software through group policies. So those are various ways of doing it, but the SCCM sort of pulls it all together. So you'll see when we start using it, when we start installing it, it's actually a really big beast. Okay, it's not meant for a small network or even a medium-sized network. It's really meant for a larger type network where it's not feasible, or it's not feasible to manually manage all your computers, or even using those individual tools like WSUS, like deployment services, like group policy to install your operating systems and your softwares and your updates, and check for compliance and manage things like Windows Defender and so forth. So let's get into what we're talking about here. So today we're going to give you an intro to what is System Center Configuration Manager, just an overview. And what we'll do is, as we go through the different topics, we'll focus on each individual topics. Also, guys, before I forget, is that you know how we're all working online and off-site and all those kind of things? Did you guys get an email about sent to you about the IT hubs, guys? Did you get an email or some reference to the idea of
Yeah,
IT
I
hub?
think so.
Okay,
I
do you
believe
understand
so.
what it means?
Just rechecking.
No, you don't have to read it. I'm just asking if you guys have an overview understanding. So, for example, if Jack, I think Jack, you said that you only had a system with 8 gigs of RAM right now, right?
Yeah, it's my laptop. Yes.
Yeah. And Walter, you said your laptop was a bit sort of older as well. And obviously that's probably not the best reason, but there's other reasons as well. Like, for example, if your internet connection is pretty slow, or you're limited in how much download you have. For example, we talked about how we can download files and virtual machines from the IT studies NAS. These IT hubs are meant for you to be able to drop in. It's not a specific subject. It's just an area where you can go in and use the TAFE equipment. If your equipment or your internet connection or something like that is not up to scratch, you're probably going in the opposite of what we're trying to do. And it is to extent, because we're allowing you to drop in. There's no dedicated classes as such, and it's not just for TAFE IT students. It's for any student accessing any course. But obviously within this area, it's actually all social distanced, so meaning that you're not going to be working right next to someone. And obviously we're expecting you to practice good social distancing and good hand hygiene yourselves and all those kind of things. And if obviously don't go to public if you're sick and all those kind of things, but at least it's a way of actually for you to still access TAFE resources if you need to. Okay, so if your computer's not working as well as you've hoped, or if you need to take your portable hard drive just to get these files in a quicker way, if it's convenient to go to the campus, then these IT hubs are available for you guys to access. Okay, you guys got that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
No worries. So make sure you understand that's available. So let's get into it. So today's objective is to give you a basic brief history of Configuration Manager. And we'll look at some of the Configuration Manager features, an overview of the servicing model, gathering deployment intelligence, and planning Configuration Manager environment, and designing your Configuration Manager environment. So what is System Center Configuration Manager? So System Center Configuration Manager focuses on managing the management of PCs, servers, mobile devices from a single management console. So that's what I'm talking about before. So basically, instead of going to the WSUS to manage updates, instead of going to deployment services to manage deployments, instead of going to group policies to look at deploying apps and creating your GPOs, you're using this configuration manager to do everything. Configuration manager still makes use of WSUS, so you're still going to have a WSUS somewhere. You're still going to have deployment services somewhere. It's just that it's using this to manage those other things and to do it from a single location. So you guys are probably familiar with the idea of BYOD. So everyone, when we did have classes, it seemed like everyone had a laptop, or a lot of people would rather use their own laptops and rather than the computers in the classroom. So with increased rate of change, with the increased demand of support of scenarios such as bring your own devices, System Center Configuration Manager is another way of managing these. Organizations are faced with challenges of allowing the employees to choose which device they use versus the management of devices that will need to have access to corporate system and potentially store corporate data as well as employee personal data on these devices. Configuration Manager provides a comprehensive cross-platform and user-centric way of deployment of applications and manage user devices, whether they are corporate connected or cloud-based. So, for example, right now, we're all working from home, but I can still, if I go to the store, the Microsoft Store, guys, you notice that I have a TAFE SA because my device is managed by TAFE SA. You notice that I have still a TAFE SA area where I can actually find apps that are provided to me by the TAFE SA for being obviously an employee of TAFE SA, and you guys as students of TAFE SA can actually still get apps even though I'm at home through the cloud. So that's what they're talking about here. So a brief history of Configuration Manager. So I'm not going to walk you through every version, but basically, if you look at this, there used to be a SMS. We used to call it SMS, System Management Server, and that started way back in 1994. And then we switched over to the idea of System Center Configuration Manager as of 2007. And there's various iterations. Okay, so you can see there's System Center 2012. Then you notice that we have System Center Manager current branch and these numbers here. You guys remember what these numbers actually mean? Can anyone tell me what, for example, this number actually means?
The year and what month it was released in, generally?
Yeah, exactly. So basically now, if you haven't noticed with and we'll talk about this in a second, if you haven't noticed with Microsoft, like for example, Windows 10, if I actually open up the Windows version of my Windows 10, if you haven't heard, Windows 10 is the last operating system or client operating system that the Microsoft will ever release. Do you understand what that means?
Yeah, it's becoming a live service operating
Yeah,
system.
exactly. It doesn't mean that they're never gonna have a newer operating system or of such. Is that you don't have to buy. Remember back in the day we bought Windows XP, then Vista came along, then Windows 7, then this and that, and we had to upgrade. And sometimes it was a free upgrade path from Windows 8 to Windows 10, for example. Sometimes you had to pay additional licensing fee for getting an upgrade. But basically with Windows 10 and this servicing model is that you get Windows 10 however you got it in the first place, whether that was a free upgrade path from Windows 8 or you just bought it with your computer, then that is your operating system, and it is going to be the very latest operating system forever. Meaning that if you haven't noticed, mine, for example, says 1809. Okay, so if you remember, that means 2018, last year, so 2 years ago, and in September. You're probably going, wow, that's a bit outdated. What about you guys? Click on, hit the start button and type WinVer. What number do you guys have?
1909.
1909, yeah. And what about anyone else?
1903.
1903, Walter?
I've also got 1909.
1909, yeah. So basically, 1909 was the last major upgrade. If you remember last year, towards the end of last year, I just remember this, there was an update that took ages. It's just sort of like you think it's a normal update and needs to restart, but it just took hours sometimes to actually update. Do you guys remember that?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, what was happening was that your whole operating system was actually being upgraded from the old version, like someone said 1903, to the 1909, which is a major. They usually release quarterly major upgrades or updates, and then little updates throughout the year. So that's the new service model, okay? And there's and you're probably wondering, why does my laptop say 1809? Well, that's because TAFE SA doesn't necessarily, you don't have to upgrade, because our computers, our personal computers, are usually being updated by just checking the internet, aren't they? They're automatically being updated through whatever's available on the internet, the very latest updates. But from a point of view of a organization, you don't necessarily want to upgrade when the upgrade is available, or update, or when the update's available. If you remember, we spoke about the fact that you don't want to be the first. It might mean that you haven't adequately tested the updates yet, and it might impact on some functionality of your computers. So, who's got VMware Workstation 15?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So if you remember, sort of late last year or early last year, sometime last year, you got VMware 15, then it updated you to VMware 15 point something almost straight away. Did you notice that?
Yeah, and some of the VMs wouldn't launch.
Yeah, it wouldn't launch until you upgraded to the latest one. What, didn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So if you remember, that was one of the issues. So when you updated your Windows, basically, when you updated your Windows to this newer update, suddenly your VMware functionality was lost, because the old, I don't know exactly the changes, but it was well documented. But the VMware released an update to to VMware pretty much straight away to fix that problem. But until you did that, your computers wouldn't launch, and your virtual machines wouldn't launch, and you don't even. It was so hard to work out why it wasn't launching as well. But as soon as you updated, it started working again. So basically, just because there's an update, just because there's a what's an upgrade available, doesn't mean you should necessarily go to it. Okay, so by having System Center Configuration Manager, and the idea of the WSUS is that we choose what upgrades, what updates are applied to our computers. And in my case, I've still got the 1806, which is what our standard operating environment for Windows 10 in TAFE SA is all about. Obviously, they're going to upgrade it on their timetable rather than on Microsoft's timetable, based on thoroughly testing and making sure functionality. Here are some configuration manager features. So there's application management. What does that mean? That means basically we deploy, think about TAFE SA, think about literally the thousands of computers that's on the campus, literally thousands. And don't forget, we've got multiple campuses and multiple sites and all those kind of things. Do you think someone would be going to a physical machine, sitting there, installing the operating system, then installing every applications to get it all exactly the same? Would you like to have that job? I know you guys want to work in IT. Would you like to have that job of actually going to, let's say we're in a classroom, there's 20 computers. Would you like to be that person that goes into the classroom, sits on one computer, starts installation, then installs all the apps? and then go to the next computer and do the same thing until you get all 20 done just for that computer room. Would you like that to be your job all day long, every day?
No.
Not
No
particularly.
way. Yeah, no way. And guess what? You're gonna, even though you're the same person doing the same thing, you're gonna get inconsistencies as well. You might forget to do something, you might miss a step. So with the application management, it means that we're through this central point can manage and deploy operating systems, not just one, many types of operating systems, and associate these images that we'll call them images in the future to certain hardware. And basically, if they need a rebuild, what someone does is actually just reboot it into network from the network, and then it will deploy the operating system. And based on the configuration manager, it will deploy all the applications needed as well. Other things include company resource access, compliance settings. So compliance is what these computers should have turned on, turned off, disabled from you. So if a classic example is, again, I'm using a TAFE SA computer. A classic example is, if you remember how we talked about Windows updates, you notice that, hey, this is actually, I can't even check my update. Even though it's been updated recently, I can't actually check my updates because this option is actually managed by my organization. So if I can look at this, you can see that there's some group policies that are applied to me, and there's basically it's all this is actually managed by my organization, which in this case is TAFE SA. And as a result, it can actually test for compliance. If so, basically, how do we know every computer's got or been configured or has received the update or has the updates? We can actually set what's called a baseline that these computers might have, and if they meet that baseline, meaning they have these updates, these operating systems, etc., wherever you want to put in there, then they are said to be compliant. If they're not compliant, then it will be easily for you to identify which computers are not non-compliant. And obviously, when they get on the network and they have access to the SCCM, what we can do is actually bring those computers into compliance behind the scenes. Then there's endpoint protection as well. So remember how we talked about the updates and Windows Defender? All that it's actually managed by, it can be managed by System Center Configuration Manager again. Where it gets the updates, whether they got the downloaded the virus signatures, whether their firewall is turned on, whether the certain firewall rules that we were talking about manually creating last time is actually the firewall is configured correctly. And the best thing is, besides actually configuring it, we can see what devices are actually not configured correctly. We can have a inventory of the computers. So remember how we talked about hardware inventory, but this is actually similar to that in the sense that we can actually use the system manager, configuration manager to actually get inventory of all the devices. We can use it to manage mobile devices like the BYOD, like we talked about, as well as our own assets. We can use it to deploy operating systems to workstations as well as servers. Power management, so again, how long they go to sleep for, screensaver, and all that kind of stuff we can configure. We can use queries to actually query computers that fit a specific requirements. Okay, so we might be looking for computers which is associated with the IT department, for example. We can configure the remote connection profile. We can remote control using SCCM to remote control. So if you're working on a service desk, for example, and you have a help desk call and someone is having problems, let's say, configuring their screensaver or something like that, something silly, something easy, but your user that doesn't know how to do it or is getting it wrong, you can actually just use the System Center Configuration Manager to go in and take control of their computer and use it to fix their problem. We can use it for reporting Reporting meaning that we can actually use it to create reports of how many computers, for example, are compliant, non-compliant, etc. How many computers are in our inventory. We can use it for software metering. So if we had, for example, this piece of software, let's say it's Adobe Creative Suite, and we only have 100 licenses. Ooh, we can't just put it on a deployment list and deploy it to all the computers at TAFE. We can actually use software metering to actually count how many licenses are being deployed and whether they're deployed to the right computers, and also obviously take away those software if it's not to the right computers. We can use it to manage the updates like we talked about with the aid of WSUS, but using this System Center Configuration Manager to manage that as well. We can look at user data and profile configuration items using Wake on LAN. So if you've never heard of that, that's where computers can be actually turned on, not by physically walking to that computer, but just sending a Wake on LAN onto that network to tell that computer to turn on. Meaning that, like for example, right now at TAFE, in let's say the classroom we normally are meant to be in, if they wanted just to re-image all the classroom because it's the start of this term, and they want to have a fresh deployment, so all the problems that we had last term is wiped away and all the data is wiped away, we can actually just send a Wake on LAN to a specific classroom, and using the auto deployment of operating systems and applications, turn this on and deploy those operating systems and refresh those computers. So it also gives us asset intelligence. So basically, give us information about the different assets we've got, and manage application virtualization management and client health monitoring. So if application management allows the creation, management, and deployment of programs. Okay, has monitoring capability of deployment. Appropriate actions can be taken in the event of any issues. So there's this idea of collections, and we'll use this as we go along, is a way of grouping resources together that share a common collection based on queries, allowing them to be updated dynamically. So for example, if my computer was part of had a collection associated with me, and there was an update to a program, then that program will be updated as well when I get connected to the network. Collections can consist of computers, users, or user groups, or any discovered resource in the configuration management. So we can connect a lot of these things together. It's used to enable other features such as maintenance windows, collection variables. So maintenance windows is where, for example, you wouldn't want to do updates 9 to 5 in a normal business hours if your users are using those, but your maintenance window might be from 9 till 12 midnight, and so therefore you can perform some of these updates and restarts and so forth when the users are not at the station. Company resource access, so we can use SCCM to create and deploy profiles to control the access to the client's resources, including certificates, and certificates are used for encryption as well as securing communication, the email, VPN, and Wi-Fi. So for example, recently, you know how we are working from home. Even though I'm working from home, for example, the TAFE SA through the SCCM was able to give me access to this 40 client. So 40 client, if you've never heard of the term 40Gate, that's a company that offers web proxies as well as other security appliances as well as VPN. So this was installed onto my computer automatically once I was given VPN access, and I can actually log in to the TAFE SA network and still access resources like we talked about. So if you remember from the IMWS what VPNs are, this is just a more advanced way of actually giving VPN access. Instead of using Server 2016 as the VPN server, it's using a 40Gate appliance, security appliance, as that VPN server. And instead of using the Windows dial-up to create the VPN, we're using a we're using a client software like that 40 client. And what's even better is that it's using multiple authentication sources, multi-factor authentication, because it uses a sort of a token, 40 token, that automatically refreshes a number. Let's have a look at this for example. So 40 token, and basically it's an app you install on your mobile phone, and basically it just generates this number every 30 seconds or a period of time. And basically when you log into this 40 client, besides putting the password in, you would have to input that number, and that number is constantly changing. And it's basically that change is at a specific rate and uses a specific web method that as long as I've got that client 40 token, I can put it in and it will give me access. Compliance settings. So some of the compliance settings includes addressing configuration drift within the enterprise. So if you don't know what configuration drift is, like when you build your computer, you've installed the operating system, you've configured your browser, you've configured your various settings in your computer to be exactly how you want. But after a while, after 6 months, you'll realize that, hey, you've changed the configurations, you've modified the configuration, you've updated programs and so forth. But configuration, that's what's called configuration drift. But obviously that's fine because it's your personal computer and you can do whatever you like to it. But if it's a work managed, enterprise managed computer or desktop or laptop, that's not necessarily a good thing. So basically enterprise administrators and security teams need tools that enable them to set configuration baselines that contains configuration on how specific items should be configured, and basically is what it has to be configured, and it will prevent the users or things they use from changing these configuration. For example, the local disabling the local guest account, or Windows integrated security SQL for SQL server should be enabled, and so on. So your firewall is on, your updates, automatic updates is checking on every week or every day at 3 a.m., etc. That can all be configured, and it prevents the user from changing it, like you saw with my updates. And that will address the configuration drift. These configuration baselines are then deployed, and the results reported back to provide details of any configuration drift. So some things can be locked out, some things can be still available, but one of the best things about SCCM is that the reports it can create allows you to identify things like configuration drift, so you can take some action. You can configure your baselines from scratch, or you can use some best practice from Microsoft and their partners. The ability to configure and monitor and remediate. So if you've never heard of the term remediate, that means to fix something, to remediate your spelling, or you remediate the retaining wall or something like that, is to fix it. And to remediate the system based on specific needs is key to IT operation management, and is part of the ITILs and manage ITILs, if the Information Technology Infrastructure Libraries, and that's basically an industry standard for setting up service desks and managed object format, respectively. Endpoint protection. This is actually quite important, especially in cyber security and so forth, because endpoints are all your devices, such as your servers, such as your desktop, your laptops, your phones, everything. Obviously, we all know that your desktops should have antivirus, anti-malware. The firewall should be turned on. Automatic updates should be turned on. And also, it would be good if we actually know if there's actually a problem on these endpoints. So basically, this endpoint protection allows the management of the anti-malware policies, so we can configure it how we want and push it out to these client computers, as well as the firewall. Endpoint protection requires separate license because it installs its own client that is separate from the configuration manager client. So, this endpoint protection is additional fee on top of that. And it's talking about client. So when we get into System Center Configuration Manager, you'll realize that in order to do all of these things, there's this agent that's installed on all your computers. Okay, this agent is a piece of software that we can use to actually report back from those computers, as well as send instructions from the SCCM to those computers. Inventory can inventory the hardware and software device of your devices in the enterprise. So, for those of you who just finished IMWS, if we talked about asset register. Well, one way is to create it from scratch manually, using some free software and so forth, and getting the hardware and software information of each computer and putting into a database. But with SCCM, we can actually just get this information from your systems because we're getting them to report back to us. So instead of going to each computer, they send their information to us. Software, so hardware inventory can be gathered, can gather information for you from your systems. Software inventory can gather lists of file types and their versions installed on the computer with exe files such as the default. We can combine this with asset intelligence or AI knowledge base, and you can get a good handle on what hardware and software is being used. And what's even better is that we can see what hardware and what software is being used. And we can also at the same time know what software and hardware is not being used. So let's say we spent money on this piece of software, but hardly anyone's using it. Or we bought 100 licenses for a piece of software, but we only realized that only 10 people are using it. That's not necessarily going to be something that's worthwhile. So maybe next time when we need to buy the license subscription, or whether we upgrade to the newer version, it might mean that we can get less, as well as hardware. So if the hardware is not even being turned on or it's not being used, do we actually need that piece of hardware? So mobile device manager. So with the configuration manager, current branch includes two types of mobile device manager management. There's mobile device management with Windows Intune. Intune is actually another device similar to SCCM, but it's something that it's most often found in schools, like primary schools and high schools. And you might see this if you ever get a job in a school environment. Or you can use the on-premise mobile device management. We can use OSD, which is operating system deployment. So this is getting to what we'll look at. We'll deploy operating systems to machines. We'll create distribution of operating system images that include any updates, applications to computers both managed and unmanaged by the configuration manager. And we can boot them from PXE or pre-execution environment boot, or bootable media such as USB, DVD, or CDs. Power management. So the power management feature allows you to create different power management plans. And so basically, when to turn them off, when to go to sleep. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with those. These plans can be enforced on a collection of computers. So for example, if our policy is that you lock your computers after 15 minutes, we can enforce that. Meaning that people who walk away from their stations without locking them, it will automatically lock for them. The various reports relating to power management that allows you to ensure power settings have been deployed correctly, so we can get reports. So like I said, there's reports for everything, almost. So meaning that we, besides being able to do it, we can see what's happening. Queries, we can retrieve information from a configuration management site database about resources in your environment that meets certain criteria. such as all machines running a certain version of Windows, all machines running a certain program, or so forth. Queries can be used to create mini reports, which can actually show information about your network quite to decision makers. Remote connection profile allows you to create profiles that contain remote desktop connection settings. Okay, it can also let you configure users that then use the company portal to access remote desktop to remotely connect to their Windows, iOS, or Android corporate devices from their work computer. Remote control, so it allows computers support staff to remotely troubleshoot problems. Like I mentioned, if you're working on a help desk, you don't need to walk to the desktop. You can actually use the SCCM to remote control that desktop from the one interface again. And so this uses that remote assistance and remote desktop feature again, drawing on the fact that I mentioned that SCCM doesn't reinvent the wheel and tries to do everything differently. It just it's a centralized way of using all those features, a lot of the features that we've been learning about, but from a more centralized way. Reporting. So SCCM can run reports and show data from a configuration manager site database for all of the various features. So for example, client installation. So remember, if we talked about that bit of program that's installed on the client machines, we can inventory, software deployment, updates, or even status or alert messages. Configuration current branch ships with over 400 out-of-the-box reports that you can edit. So basically, these are pre-configured reports that you can use or edit to get information out of your network. You can create your own as well if you have SQL knowledge or skills. You can use using the SQL reporting service to create reports based on your requirements. Software metering allows you to collect information about the software usage. So basically to help you see how many instances of the software is being used, how many software should be purchased, and the licensing. So you wouldn't want to accidentally break your license agreement by installing more instances of the software onto systems just because it's automated. So with the software metering, we can actually use this to protect us against breaking the license agreement, as well as seeing or looking at who's using it, where it's being used. Using software metering, you can do the following: report on the software that's being used in your environment and which users are running the software. Report on the number of concurrent users of the software. Report on the license requirements, and find software that's installed but is not being used. This is probably just as important, because if you had 100 licenses and not 1,000, let's say for TAFE SA computers, you gotta really know where you want to install it and where it's being used. If they're not being, they're wasted. So you might find a better way of a better place to install it. The twist on software metering is that the metering rules are automatically populated or created, but disabled by default. So we have to actually turn it on, and it's based on the software inventory. This allows you to rapidly meter applications to gain insights to each. Software metering is part of the service management process in ITILs, and change and configuration in SMF in MOF. Based on the utilization of software, you can measure when applications are properly used in the environment for better inventory and current assets. For updates, so with SCCM, you can actually again integrate with WSUS to actually deploy updates, control the deployment of updates to your environment. You can also manage the patching of partner technology. So you're often thinking, oh, it's only Microsoft software that can be patched. But all of these, HP, Dell, so these are hardware vendors. So you know that there's a lot of firmware driver updates. They can all be delivered through this SCCM WSUS. IBM, Citrix, and others for their BIOS and firmware driver updates. User and data profile configuration items allows you to manage roaming profiles, offline files, and folder redirection. So you might have heard of some of these things from before. So we've done folder redirection. We talked about offline files, the ability to basically take files or cache them on your computer when you take your laptop from work home and still be able to work on them and bring them back, and they resynchronize with that on your local file systems. The wake on LAN allows you to wake up computers that have been turned off so they can run a deployment. Asset intelligence. Asset inventory is one of the reporting structures used to analyze and ensure that every asset on the system is being used properly and report to the report this to management. Application virtualization management. So we'll talk more about AppVs in the future, but AppV effectively a virtual app. It's instead of actually individual virtual machines, it's a group of virtual machines that are managed like a single unit, and basically has features for managing the AppVs as well. Client health and monitoring displays client health evaluation results and client activities. So if you remember, when your computer has the firewall turned off, or it doesn't have the updates, or it doesn't have the virus signatures downloaded, it often just gives you notifications to you because it's your computer. But instead of actually just displaying to the user, this client health and monitoring allows these notifications to be sent to the SCCM and gives the administrator a sort of ability to monitor the computers on the network, provides alerting and remediation capability. So remediation is to fix them up. So if the firewall's off, how can we fix that? If the antivirus is out of date, how do we fix it? So let's have a look at the servicing model. So we briefly spoke about it already. So before configuration, previous versions of Configuration Manager had a version number such as 2007 or 2012, indicating there were major releases in the year of their release. In line with Microsoft update policy at the time, service packs, cumulative updates, and R releases were typically released throughout the life cycle of the product. So you might remember there was Windows Server 2012. There was Windows Server 2012 R2. So that's what they're referring to. But now, with the advent of Windows 10, like I said, Windows 10 is the last version of Windows that's ever going to be released. That's the plan anyway. But that doesn't mean it's going to be outdated within a few years. It doesn't mean it's going to be the worst operating system after 5 years. It just means that you don't have to buy a new operating system. You don't have to redeploy a new operating system. For us as individuals, getting a new operating system deployed is a bit of an annoyance because we have to upgrade to that new operating system. I'm not sure about you guys, but when I was using Windows 7 for quite a while and was pretty happy with it. And then when Windows 8 came out, you had to upgrade because obviously you work in technology and whatnot. But the temptation was that I just stay with it. And what's worse is that Windows 10 came along straight after that, and you had to do an upgrade again. And from a point of view of a company, it's not just doing your own upgrades or of your own computer. You're upgrading all the computers. And that can be a very, very big project in itself. So with Windows 10, the idea is that there's not going to be new operating systems to be upgraded in the traditional way. Instead, Windows 10 will be the last version with planned update released every 3 months, which is denoted by that version that we talked about, the year, month version. For example, in November 2015, would be 1511. In addition, Windows 10 has the following 3 servicing branches. There's the current branch for business, the long-term servicing branch. This allows users to control how often want the updates, their version of Windows 10 going from 3 months in the case of current branch to once a year in the long-term servicing branch. So basically, like for example, TAFE SA, you might have seen that the version was 2018. That's because they don't necessarily have to upgrade or update every 3 months. So this current branch is what most of our personal computers are set to, meaning they update every 3 months, every quarter, like we talked about. But in a company, that they might not want to update when it comes out. So baseline versus incremental update version. So Microsoft will periodically release what is known as a baseline release. So that's a major release. So remember that major release we talked about towards the end of last year, where it took ages to update. In other words, they were basically new installations. So basically, they were, if you were to think of it, in the old days, it might have been just a change from Server 2012 to Server 2012 R2. It might have been an update from Windows 8 to Windows 10. So that's how significant the updates were. So basically, this major baseline release means that all these updates that come afterwards will be based on the fact that you have this major release, because it'll incorporate all the updates that's from previous ones, and we don't have to worry about updating anything like that, as well as a lot of feature and improvements. Then every 3 months or 3 to 4 months, Microsoft will release updates known as increment updates, versions that you install on top of these baselines. These updates still have the year format, but they're smaller updates, and we get them all the time. And so almost every month. So if you noticed, every month on probably a Tuesday, your computer will ask to restart because there's been an update. Have you noticed that yourselves, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That on a regular clock, isn't it? So basically, these are incremental updates. Incremental updates have the following features. They replace service packs and cumulative updates used in previous versions. They contain both fixes and new features, giving you control which new features you use and when. You decide which updates you install and when. Once you decide to install an update, Configuration Manager automatically upgrades all the relevant components, such as the site servers, its components, consoles, and clients. And I'm using a lot of words there that don't necessarily make sense to you right now, because basically when we're talking about site servers and the consoles, they're referring to elements of this Configuration Manager, and we'll start using them as we get into it. If you're running a remote console, the next time you load it and it connects to the site running the later version, you will receive the notification that an updated console is available, and you will be offered the opportunity to install it. You'll see during our installation of Update Manager, we will have to update the Update Manager ourselves. Okay, we would have to actually update it several times. You can't just go from one to the latest. There's a couple steps involved in that, as in we upgrade to this one so we can go to the next one and so forth. You no longer need to download and install the updates manually. A key benefit of this is that you will know when an update is available, rather than encountering an issue when discovering a fix was released for it and you weren't aware of it. So let's talk about planning the Configuration Manager infrastructure. So the Microsoft Solution Framework will guide you to set up a project plan with the following phases. So there's gather deployment intelligence, there's plan and design the configuration management environment, develop, build a proof of concept of the new environment, stabilize, which performs a pilot with multiple key users, so basically a testing feature, deploy, migrate the users to the new infrastructure. So basically, if you want to know about this, Microsoft Solutions framework, you can go to the TechNet and look at the documentation. So let's have a look at gathering deployment intelligence. When you want to implement a new or you want to migrate from Configuration Manager 2007 or 2012, you need to write a plan of approach. As with anything, these projects, you just don't go in and just do it because you're going to affect too many people. Negatively, if you get things wrong or you actually do things when they're not expecting it. So there's always needs to be a plan, and there's always needs to be a testing. There always needs to be an acceptance by the users that this is the new approach. This is when it's going to happen. You guys have sort of gone through that many times with various projects that we've done as assessments already. It's crucial to describe your current environment and define a goal when you want to reach or make a business for the project. So the configuration manager is built on 3 pillars, as in 3 key features. It empowers users, it unifies the infrastructure, and simplifies administration. So it basically empowers users. You notice that I, as a user, was able to go to that software and deploy software to my computer based on what I wanted, based on what was available to me. Unified infrastructure, because you don't have to go to policy, you don't have to go to WSUS, you don't have to go to deployment manager, you don't have to go to Pixie Boot, wherever, to configure all these things so you can do things every time. You can just integrate it all with the system center and use the system center as one place to do all of it. So it simplifies administration. Some questions to ask. Okay, what do you accomplish? Okay, there's no point just installing this and working out what you want to get out of it at the end when you finish it. You need to actually ask yourself or ask your systems or people, the group, what you want to actually get out of it. Does the configuration manager need to have high availability? So high availability means basically redundance, no single point of failure, and highly available means running more often than not. How is your IT management organized? Do you have a service desk? Do you have tiers of support? So basically, if you don't have all of that, who's going to do what part of it? Do you need role-based administration, or are all administrators allowed to perform every task? You'll soon realize that in a small environment, all administrators do everything, basically. But in a large environment, there's different levels, tiers. You might have heard of the term tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 support. And basically, these are doing specific jobs. For example, tier 1 might be handling service desk requests, as in taking the calls, and escalating the jobs if it's beyond what they can do from the help desk. But they might have certain level of access to the infrastructure. So that's where that role-based administration is actually, if you're in this role, you are given access to this, you are delegated these permissions to be able to perform certain actions. Another question is, how is your organization organized? Does it have many sites? Does it have many departments? Is it many domains, and so forth? Do you need to implement, or do you support a full application lifecycle model? Okay, that basic lifecycle model goes from deployment, updating, and removal of the software from your systems. What kind of devices are you going to support? Okay, so that depends on your service level agreement. Okay, if you're supporting external clients, for example, or internal clients, you have to have a service level, meaning these are the things we're going to support and these are the things we're not going to support. Because people can't just, like your users, can't expect you to fix every device, every operating system, every different configuration under the sun, just because you're IT. Because I can tell you now, I might have some good skills in Windows and some skills in Linux, skills in Cisco, but I can tell you now, I have no skills in Apple workstations and whatnot. So if someone brings in the Apple and it wants me to fix it or help them fix it, I'm going to say that's outside of my abilities. And obviously, if it's part of your support level contract, then you have to have some people with abilities in these areas. Whereas if it's outside of the scope, then you're not obligated to support it. Okay, which level of support do you want to provide? Are there relationships between user systems? Are people always using certain devices, or do people change devices all the time? For example, if you take the staff of TAFE SA, we have our own laptops or desktop computers that we use all the time. But if you take the students move classrooms, move computers, they sit on different computers all the time, aren't they? So there's, in the case of staff, there is a relationship. In the case of students, there isn't a relationship between a specific device and a specific user. Do you deploy operating systems? Okay, do you deploy your own operating systems, or do you just support the operating systems that's already been deployed? If so, where do you need to deploy them? Okay. Would you like to implement self-service for the end users? So wouldn't it be good if the users can do a lot of things for themselves? It comes with advantages and drawbacks as well. Are you going to use one set of client settings, or are there a need for different client settings for different based on collections of users or devices? That's for a small company. That's, you probably find most people would just get the same settings, no problems at all. All need this software, all need this operating system, all need this software, and there's not much deviation from that. But if you take something like TAFE SA again as a larger example of a larger company, then you'll realize that, hey, as an IT student, you need Packet Tracer, you need VMware Workstation, you need Visio, you need this and you need that. But for a hairdressing student, for example, they don't need VMware Workstation. They don't need Packet Tracer. They may need something else that I'm not even aware of, but you can see that different departments, different computers that's allocated to different locations may need different configuration settings. Will you need to use remote management features such as Configuration Manager? If so, for what device? Is there a need to use hardware and software inventory and asset intelligence? Is there a service level agreement available that must be met after the implementation? So basically, what if there's a service level agreement, meaning you have to support these clients between certain times for certain services and so forth. Planning the configuration management environment. So configuration manager can be installed and configured in many different ways. You must make many design decisions. So you've got to look at the system requirements and obviously Active Directory. So we all know about Active Directory, how that's almost central to everything in Microsoft. The hierarchies and sites. How many do you have? So again, taking TAFE SA example, we have lots of sites all across the state. So it's not always in the CBD, which makes life a lot easier. There's things that's in the country, the things which sites which might be in the country, regional areas which have really poor WAN links, for example. Site boundaries and boundary groups, and we'll talk more about this when they come up. The site system roles, again, what roles are you going to have at each site? Site communications, how they communicate. Site security, is some sites more secure or less secure than others? Discovery of your resources, client settings and client deployments, content management, role-based administration, migration and disaster recovery. So these are all the things we have to take into consideration when we're making design decisions. So physical location of your environment. Where are my locations? Okay, for TAFE SA, we've got one in the city. That's the main site. Got Noarlunga, Mount Gambier, so many physical locations. You got to know where all things are and how you're going to implement. Are you going to implement the full range of services at each site or not? Are my locations on the same continent? So TAFE SA is not quite that big yet, but some companies are. Are they even on the same country, same continent? What is the available bandwidth? That's a very appropriate thing for TAFE SA because, like I said, TAFE SA has sites all over the state. Some in the CBD and metropolitan areas, great internet relatively speaking, and some in the country that the internet is not even as good as some of your home plans that you guys are on right now. How many users are working at the location? Okay, that's always a important thing. So, for example, the primary site can handle up to 160,000 clients, depending on the hardware performance and bandwidth you have. But how many clients do you have at these sites? Do you have a central administration sites or not? Again, taking TFSA as an example, it sort of makes sense that we do have a central site. Okay, for TFSA, just so you just give you a background, our central administration site is actually at the Regency campus. Most of our call centers and people that deal with in bulk with students and services are based in the Regency campus. High availability consideration. So high availability is where your services are more available than not, and that obviously takes into account redundancies, not just of parts of hard drives, of connections, minimizing single points of failure, and all those kind of things. Client settings, boundary management, what separates one site from another site. It doesn't always have to be physical location. It could be just like, for example, TFSA, the boundary might be student classroom computers versus staff, staff desk computers. So you can see that we might have different settings or different security levels, different settings for students versus those of the staff computers. Virtualization, taking that into consideration, managing untrusted environments. So you would, again, taking TAFE, I would say most of TAFE classrooms should be considered untrusted. You get me, guys? Would you agree that most of all, if not all, the classrooms should be considered untrusted? Why do you guys think that? Hey guys, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Yep.
Yeah, still here. Yep.
So they shouldn't be trusted because, one classroom could have an infected computer. You don't want that to go to the rest of the network. So,
and also the users that use it. Okay, so I'm not saying you guys are bad, as in you students are bad and terrible people. I'm just saying
you just can't trust everyone.
It's just that you students, especially with some IT savvy, can potentially
do more damage than an idiot.
Do damage. Bring your own BYOD devices that might not be patched or protected by enterprise firewall. If you are given access to some of our sensitive systems because you're not employees, you probably shouldn't access some of these things. You get me? And also, we leave a lot of our students to work in the classrooms by themselves. The library, the IT hub that we spoke about, people drop in. Who's to say who's in there? What systems are they using? Do they bring their own laptop with malicious malware or even, penetration testing tools that they could use against our systems? So that's why I would personally consider all our classroom, not to say that you guys are not trusted as individuals, but as a general assessment of the classrooms, I imagine they should not be considered trusted environments. And the other consideration is the naming and naming the configuration manager sites, how we name them. Planning the configuration manager hierarchy. So hierarchy means different levels. So define a naming convention. So how we name things. Determine whether a CAS is needed and where to place this site in your environment. The CAS is the topmost site of your configuration management hierarchy. So define the placement of the primary site, the secondary sites, and any other distribution points. So these distribution points basically are where we can distribute programs, operating systems like we talked about. We look at the logical and physical connections between your configuration manager sites so you can decide whether to address the need to configure to manage the traffic between these sites, assign boundaries that represent your configuration manager sites, and be sure that no boundary overlaps another. Okay, they're not really boundaries if they're overlapping one another. Depending on the configuration manager sites, high availability demands, and other requirements, you can place the site system roles where they are needed. Site system roles we'll talk about is basically the different roles that's part of the configuration manager. Planning site configuration management systems. This is done by analyzing your requirements per site, gathered during the deployment intelligence phase. Depending on the expected load and the number of connected users, you can place roles on different servers or group them on one server. So basically, we can have lots of roles on the same server, and that's what we'll end up doing, because obviously we don't want to have too many virtual machines running around. But reality is that if you have lots and lots of users and computers, you may not want to put all these roles onto the same server, because it just means that that server is working a lot harder. Whereas if you put them across many different servers, the workload is distributed across many servers rather than the single one. When planning a high availability configuration manager structure, you will need to plan several site roles on more than one server. Different ways to deploy configuration management clients. So basically, if you remember, we said that in order for the clients and get all those information fed back to the configuration manager, as well as to send instructions to the endpoints, we have these software that's actually installed on these computers, endpoints. We can install the client software. It's actually a little piece of software. It's the configuration manager client. Let me just see if I can find it on my computer. Bear with me, guys. Let's see if I can find. That's not it. I can't. I'm sort of quickly scanning through it right now, but I can't seem to find it. Okay, so basically it's on this computer somewhere. I might find it later for you guys, but there's a bit of program that's actually installed onto our computers, and you can choose to install these. We can install it via client push and software updates, which means we don't have to manually install it onto the client. You can choose to deploy a new operating system to the clients with the operating system deployment feature of Configuration Manager. When clients are managed with the Configuration Manager, you can migrate the clients to a new Configuration Manager management points. Unmanaged points via client push points and software updates. So we can install these clients a couple of different ways. Determine how to deploy the configuration manager. So build a greenfield. So if you've never heard of the term greenfield, it basically means there's nothing there. Okay, so if you, for example, you're building a house, you could find a block of land and that's already got a house on it. That's not a greenfield. You might be upgrading that or making renovations to that. That's not a greenfield. Greenfield is like you got that it was farmland and someone's just bought up the whole farmland and then subdivided it, and now you've got nothing there. So you can do whatever you like, and that's what's referred to as a greenfield. And you nothing in place, things built by you. You're not working with someone else's work. So we can build as a greenfield, or we can migrate first to Configuration Manager 2007, then perform a side-by-side migration. Building a proof of concept environment, so deploy my configuration management clients, deploy the application software updates and settings, deploy the operating system, synchronize the data between sites, and the migration of objects from 2007. So here's a real world. So the next couple of slides, I'll get you to look for yourselves. Some real world case studies of people and their design of their configuration manager. and their deployment planning, and basically what they chose to do. All right, so that ends our presentation today. And basically, I would get you to work on this worksheet. But because this is our first lesson, and given the fact that we're on it's a bit weird that we're all working from home. It's that those virtual machines that you need are not going to be available to you that easily. Remember, using that instructions here, you can get access to the virtual machines you need for your various worksheets. So what I'm going to do today is, instead of actually getting you guys to work through this worksheet right now, because you can't, because you'll be spending too much time downloading the information, what I want you to do is I want you to actually get ready for next lesson. So what does that mean? That means if I actually, there's a worksheet 1, but if we go to the next one, we're going to actually install SCCM. If we actually look at what we need for next lesson, you can see it's here. So what I'll get you guys to do is I'll get you guys to go to subject files, set for SCCM, and basically these are all the files you need. I'll get you guys to download all of that to your computer. So I will assume that you will have these files on a local system after today. Okay, guys, are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so like I said, if you find it really slow to download these things from home, because these are very large files, so you can see that, yeah, these are basically three or four virtual machines plus some utility files, and a lot of them are 6 gig or 2.5 gig, and so it's like this SCCM is not a small service. Okay, it's a very big service that incorporates lots and lots of moving parts. So if you find it's too slow for you guys to download this at home, like I said, there's these IT hubs that you can just drop in quickly to your campus. You might need to get a couple of things for other subjects as well. Just take your laptop or your portable hard drive, grab the files, and you'll find that we'll need a lot of drive space on your solid state hard drive for this subject. Okay, so unfortunately, you'll will be actually creating virtual machines and then adding deployments of virtual machines onto them, and eventually, if this is my, oh, this is the 4 SCCM VMs that I was working on to do the course, and you can see they obviously I've got a few snapshots in there. So in the worksheets, one worksheet, unlike the previous subjects you've had with me, unfortunately with this subject we have to do it in a way where when you finish one part before you can move on to the next part, because obviously we're building something up from a relatively a low starting point. So obviously we don't need you to install the operating systems or the servers that we need. So that's why we're giving you these virtual machines with operating systems and a base environment and Active Directory, all those kind of things. But we'll be building on top of those. So unfortunately, when we start with next lesson's worksheet, you have to do that one before you move on to the next one. And eventually you'll get to, can you guys see the size? Mine got up to 180 gigs just for the virtual machines for this subject, without counting all those little bits and pieces of files that we needed. Okay, guys. So unfortunately, this subject is quite onerous as far as resources goes. You guys have about 200 gigs free on your solid state hard drive for this subject?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do.
If you don't, just, I don't know, reshuffle things around, maybe get a different one. We definitely need it, okay?